I want to tell you about the afternoon I came home from burying my father and found something on my doorstep that I was not prepared for. Not flowers. Not a sympathy card in a white envelope. Not the casserole dish that well-meaning people leave when they do not know what else to do and need to do something. What she had left was smaller than any of those things, and it cost me more to look at than I knew how to explain at the time. But I'm getting
there. Before I go further, if you've ever received something from someone that was so exactly right, it stopped you in the middle of grief and made you feel found rather than pitied, leave a like. Because that is the only way I know how to describe what was waiting for me on that doorstep, and I want you to understand it before I explain who left it. My father died on a Tuesday in October. He had been sick for a long time, the kind of sick where the end is not a surprise, but arrives anyway as a surprise, because knowing something is coming and being ready for it are two different things, and I have never found a way to make them the same. He had lived in Bozeman, Montana, my whole life. I had moved to Denver for work 8 years earlier. We talked every Sunday. I drove up for Thanksgiving and for his birthday in July. We were close in the particular way that fathers and adult sons are close when they have worked through the hard years and come out the other side with respect and affection and very few things left unsaid. I thought we had time. I had thought that the last 4 times, and each time I was almost wrong, and then on a Tuesday in October, I was completely wrong. I drove to Bozeman that evening. I spent 4 days with my mother and my sister, handling the things that needed handling, sitting with the people who came to sit with us, eating food I do not remember tasting, sleeping badly in my childhood bedroom with the same window I had stared at as a kid, now showing me a sky that looked exactly the same and nothing like it used to. The funeral was on Saturday. My father had been a mechanical engineer for 30 years and a woodworker for the 30 years beside that, and the people who came to say goodbye were the people those 2 lives had collected. Colleagues who respected his precision, neighbors who had received small handmade things over the years, men who had worked beside him, and women who had learned from him, and a few people who had simply loved him for no professional reason at all. I gave a eulogy. I had written it on Thursday night in my old bedroom, working on it for 3 hours until it said what I needed it to say, which was not everything, but was enough. I stood at the front of the church and read it without looking up, because if I looked up, I would see my mother's face and I needed to finish. I drove back to Denver on Sunday. 10 hours. I stopped once for gas and once because I had to. The mountains were extraordinary in that particular October way. Aspen trees gone gold all the way up the slopes. Sky so blue it looked like someone had decided to mean it. My father would have pointed at the aspens and said something specific about the color. He always knew the exact word for the exact color. I did not inherit that. I inherited his patience and his tendency to make things with my hands, but not his vocabulary for color. I thought about him most of the drive. That was the right thing to do. I got back to Denver at 7 in the evening. My apartment was on the 2nd floor of a building in Congress Park, a neighborhood with good trees and old houses, converted into small apartment buildings, and a general quality of quiet that I had chosen specifically. I parked in the lot behind the building and walked around to the front entrance, and that was when I saw it. On my doorstep, not the building entrance, my specific door on the 2nd floor, which meant she had come upstairs. A small wooden box, the kind that closes with a brass latch, the kind that used to hold index cards or small keepsakes before everything became digital. Sanded smooth, unstained, about the size of a hardback book. On top of it, tucked under the latch so it would not blow away, was a piece of paper folded once. I stood in the hallway for a moment. The building was quiet. Somewhere below me, a door opened and closed. The hallway light did its thing where it flickered once before settling. I picked up the box and the note together and went inside. Before I tell you what was in either one, let me tell you about her. Her name was Petra Sokolova. She had moved into the apartment next to mine 14 months earlier, arriving from Chicago with a station wagon loaded in a way that suggested she had thought carefully about what to bring and left behind exactly as much as she could stand to.
She was a furniture restorer who worked from a rented space 2 miles away, and sometimes brought smaller pieces home to finish.
I had learned her profession the way you learn most things about a neighbor you actually talk to. Gradually, over several conversations that happened, because we were both coming and going at the same time, and had discovered early that we were both people who would rather talk for 5 minutes than nod and look at our phones. She was 39. I was 41. We were neighbors who had become something slightly more than neighbors, without ever naming what that something was. We had eaten dinner together twice, at the Thai place on Colfax, that we had both been going to separately before we discovered the coincidence. We had walked to the farmer's market on Saturdays 4 or 5 times, not by arrangement, just by both being there and falling into step.
I had helped her carry a heavy chair up the stairs in September, and she had fed my plants for 10 days in August when I went to see my father, coming and going with the spare key I had given her as if it were the most natural thing. That was the shape of it.
I had not examined the shape too closely, for reasons that had made sense to me at the time, and made somewhat less sense the longer I stood in my apartment holding a small wooden box. I opened the note first. Her handwriting was even and unhurried, which matched the way she talked. She had written, "I didn't know your dad, but I know you. And I know you make things with your hands the way some people think with them. Your father did too, I think. I put something in the box that might help the next few days be less quiet. I'm not going to knock. You don't have to say thank you. I just wanted you to come home to something that knew you were gone." I read it twice. Then I sat down on the floor of my entryway, which was not a thing I had planned to do, and read it once more. I want you to have that sentence before I continue. I just wanted you to come home to something that knew you were gone, not something that acknowledged your loss, not something that offered comfort in the formal sense. Something that knew you were gone, as if the act of leaving deserved to be witnessed even in absence, even by an object left on a doorstep by someone who had gone home before you could thank her. That was Petra. I opened the box. Inside was a small cassette tape, the 90-minute kind, in a clear plastic case.
The label on the side had been written in the same even handwriting, for driving. Beside the tape, a small envelope. Inside the envelope, a gift card for the coffee place 2 blocks from our building. Nothing written on it, just the card. And at the bottom of the box, wrapped in a small square of brown paper and tied with kitchen twine, a single piece of wood. Smooth, pale, roughly the size of my palm. A piece of maple, I thought, though I am not always right about wood by sight.
No shape to it, no purpose. Nothing carved or assembled. Just the wood itself, clean-edged and good in the hand. I held the maple piece for a long time. I thought about my father's workshop in Bozeman, the smell of it, sawdust and mineral spirits, and the specific dry warmth that wood generates when it has been worked. The way he kept his chisels. The particular sound his table saw made that I could still hear in my head if I thought about it hard enough. The way he had handed me my first piece of good maple when I was 11 and said, "Feel that." And I had felt it and understood, at 11, that some things had a quality that required your full attention. Petra did not know any of that. She knew I made things with my hands. She had seen the small shelf I had built and mounted in the hallway last spring and asked about it with genuine interest, and I had told her more than I usually told people, and she had listened with the attention she gave to things she found worth understanding. But she had guessed. She had thought about what I would need when I came home to a quiet apartment after the worst week of my adult life, and she had guessed that I would need something to hold, something with the weight and texture of the thing I had learned from my father. She had been right. I sat on the floor of my entryway until the building settled into its late evening quiet. Then I got up, put the maple piece on my kitchen counter where I could see it, made myself something to eat that I actually tasted, and went to bed. Before I tell you what happened the next morning, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had someone see you clearly enough that they knew what you needed before you knew yourself? Not in the grand sense, not in the "we had a conversation and they offered advice" sense. In the small specific sense of a person who paid attention quietly and then acted on what they saw, without asking for credit, without waiting to be thanked. Leave a comment, because I think you'll understand why I was sitting in my kitchen the next morning, looking at a piece of maple and trying to figure out how to be equal to that kind of seeing. I went to the coffee place on Monday morning. Not the one 2 blocks away, a different one, 10 minutes in the other direction, the one Petra went to on weekday mornings. I knew she went there. I knew she ordered an oat milk cortado and usually sat at the small window table for about 45 minutes before driving to the workshop. I knew because I had been there twice when she was there, not by planning, but by the overlapping habits of 2 people whose schedules rhymed in small ways. I got there at 8:40. She was at the window table with her cortado and a small notebook she used for project measurements and sketches. She looked up when I came in, and her face did the thing it did when she was deciding whether to say the thing she was thinking. "You didn't have to come find me," she said. "I know," I said. "I meant what I wrote. You don't have to say anything." I sat down across from her. The window showed Congress Park in the early morning, leaves on the pavement, the light doing the October thing where it comes in low and golden and makes everything look like something worth keeping. "How did you know about the wood?" I asked. She held her cortado in both hands. I told her about the shelf. "And you talked about your dad's workshop once." "Briefly." She paused. "I pay attention." "You put a piece of maple in a box," I said. "My father's workshop smelled like maple." She looked at me steadily. "I didn't know that." "I know you didn't," I said. "That's what I mean." She was quiet for a moment. The morning coffee noise went on around us. Someone near the counter laughed at something. The door opened and brought in a gust of October air that smelled like leaves and cold, and the particular clarity of the end of things giving way to something else. "How are you?" she asked. Not the social version of the question, the real one. I thought about how to answer that honestly. "Bad," I said, "but less alone than I was last night." Her hands stayed around the cortado. "That's why I left it," she said quietly. "I know. I didn't want to knock because I didn't know what you'd need when you got home." She looked at the table for a second. "Sometimes people need quiet more than company." I didn't want to guess wrong. "You guessed right," I said. "About everything." She looked up. "The maple piece," I said. "I held it for a long time last night. I don't have a word for what that did, but it was the right thing." Petra looked at me with the direct, unhurried attention she gave to things she found worth understanding. Then she said simply, "I'm glad." I looked at the window and then back at her. "I want to tell you something." She waited. "I've been careful about how much I let myself think about you. For a while now." I said it without looking away. "Because you're next door, and because careful felt safer than wrong." Her hands moved slightly around the cortado. She said nothing. "And last night, I sat on the floor of my entryway, holding a box you left me. And I thought about how many small things you have noticed about me that I have never asked you to notice. And I thought about the fact that you drove upstairs and left it and went home without waiting. Because you knew I would need the quiet, but you also did not want me to come home to nothing." He paused. "That is not something a person does for a neighbor." Petra was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a cyclist went past the window fast. The coffee machine behind the counter ran through its cycle. The morning kept being the morning. Then she said, "I drove upstairs and stood outside your door for a few minutes before I left it." I looked at her. "I almost knocked," she said. "And then I thought, he just drove 10 hours from his father's funeral, and he needs to come home without having to hold himself together for anyone. So I left it and went back downstairs." She paused. "I went back downstairs and stood in the parking lot for a while." "Why?" She looked at the window. "Because I wanted to be sure you came home safely, and because I did not want you to have to explain anything to me if you needed to sit in your car for a while first." I stared at her. "You waited in the parking lot." "Until I saw your lights go on," she said simply. The coffee place kept doing its morning business around us, entirely unaware. I said, "Petra." She looked at me. I have been calling this friendship because friendship is what I was sure of. I said it the way Renata had said things, directly and without performance. But I don't think that's accurate anymore. She was quiet. I think it has been something else for a while, I said, and I think last night made it very hard to keep pretending otherwise. She set the cortado down. Her voice was low and careful and honest, in the same way the note had been. I put the maple piece in because I thought you might need something to do with your hands while you processed, she said, and because I thought your father would understand the gesture better than flowers. I looked at her. How did you know that? She almost smiled. Because you described him once, and I listened. I had described him once, in passing, in the way you mention a person when they come up naturally in conversation. She had filed it, the way she filed project measurements and wood grain and the particular quality of things worth keeping. I thought about the cassette tape, the coffee gift card for a place she knew I liked, but that required no choice on my part, no decision-making, while grief had my full attention. The maple piece at the bottom of the box. Every item placed for a specific reason. Every reason drawn from a specific observation. None of it performed. All of it exact. That is not something you do for a person you are indifferent to. I said, "Can I take you to dinner tonight?" She looked at me steadily. "Not as neighbors. Not as neighbors," I said. She picked up her cortado. She looked at the window table and then back at me with the expression of someone who had been patient for exactly the right amount of time and was now ready to stop. "I know a place," she said. "Good food. Quiet enough to talk." I nodded. "That's what I want." She closed her notebook. The project measurements could wait. We walked out of the coffee place together into the October morning, and she did not put her hand in mine yet, because that was still an hour and a conversation away, but she walked beside me at exactly the distance of someone who has already decided and is simply letting the day catch up. That evening at dinner, she told me about her grandfather, who had been a woodworker in Prague before the family emigrated, who had also kept maple scraps in a box in his workshop, who had told her once that good wood remembered the hands that shaped it. I sat across the table from her and thought about a woman who had put a piece of maple at the bottom of a box for a man she had been watching carefully for 14 months, and I thought about what it means to be known by someone who never asked you to explain yourself and never needed to. My father would have liked her. I was certain of that. He would have sat across from her the way I was sitting and found the exact word for the way she paid attention, the way he always found the exact word for the exact color. I did not have that gift, but I had been given something that night that felt equally precise. Someone who had waited in the parking lot until my lights came on. Someone who knew what to put at the bottom of a box. Someone who understood that the kindest things are never the largest things, only the most specific ones. If this story stayed with you, leave a like. And if you know what it feels like to come home to someone who paid attention while you were away, subscribe. The next story is already waiting for you. If you stayed all the way to the end, comment. She waited until the lights came on.